Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going after a microbial suspect, one that's been hiding in plain sight for, get this, a whole century. We're talking about Rothia mucilaginosa, and its story? It's a classic case of a seemingly harmless bystander turning into a real-deal pathogen. Yeah, for decades, this bug was either called something else entirely or just written off as a contaminant, just tossed in the bin. But that's all changed. Modern tech has put a massive spotlight on this thing. And what we're seeing now, let's just say it's got our attention.
So the big question is, how does a common bug, one that literally just hangs out in our mouths, become a critical clinical challenge? How does it make that leap from harmless resident to life-threatening invader? Well, that's what we're going to do. Let's trace the journey of Rothia mucilaginosa and figure out just when it decides to turn bad.
Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to look at its rise as an opportunist, how to actually spot it in the lab, this kind of crazy dual role it plays, the real challenges in treating it, and of course, how we can try to prevent these infections in the first place.
All right, let's jump right in. To really get why we call Rothia mucilaginosa an emerging pathogen, you've got to understand it's had a really messy past. Okay, look at this. This bug has had a serious identity crisis. In 1900, it's Micrococcus. Just a few years later, boom, it's a Staphylococcus. Fast forward to the 80s, now it's Stomatococcus. You can see why it was so under-recognized, right? It was this microbial chameleon. This wasn't just some academic squabble. It meant that clinically, it was flying completely under the radar. It really wasn't until the year 2000, with 16S RNA sequencing, that we could finally definitively say, okay, this is Rothia mucilaginosa. And that's when the light bulb really went on about the threat it poses. So, now that we know who we're dealing with, let's head over to the lab bench. How do we actually catch this thing in the act? Okay, when you're at the bench, there's this classic triad of features. And when you see them all together, your Rothia alarm bells should definitely start ringing. First up, the gram stain. You're looking at gram-positive cocci in these grape-like clusters, and you're thinking, okay, this has got to be a Staphylococcus. But then you look at the plate. The colonies on the blood agar are, well, they're mucoid, sticky, and they adhere to the agar like superglue. Seriously, they are tough to get off. And then the clincher. It hates salt. It will not grow in 6.5% NaCl. Put those three things together, and you have a really strong presumptive ID. So let's put it head-to-head with its doppelganger, Staphylococcus. You can see the clear differences. Rothia has those mucoid adherent colonies. Its catalase can be tricky, sometimes it's weak, sometimes it's just plain absent. It won't grow in high salt, and it's resistant to lysostaphin. Compare that to your typical staph species, non-mucoid, always catalase positive, loves salt, and is susceptible to lysostaphin. These simple bench tests are surprisingly powerful for telling them apart. But let's be real, the modern tools are what completely changed the game here. Today, MALDI-TOF is your go-to, your workhorse for a fast, reliable ID. And for the really tough cases, or for ultimate confirmation, 16S RNA sequencing is still the gold standard. But here's a really important heads up, a big diagnostic pitfall. Primers for Mycobacterium HSP65 can actually cross-amplify Rothia, so if you're not confirming with sequencing, you could make a pretty massive mistake, thinking you have a Mycobacterium when you really have Rothia mucilaginosa. Okay, so once we get good at identifying it, we start finding it all over the place. But, and this is where the story gets really interesting, it's not always the villain. This organism has a fascinating dual nature. It's like it has two completely different personalities. On one hand, you have the opportunistic pathogen. In an immunocompromised patient, especially someone with neutropenia and a central line, it's a brutal invader, causing bacteremia and endocarditis. But on the other hand, there's this emerging picture of it as an anti-inflammatory modulator. In patients with chronic lung diseases like CF, there's evidence it might actually be beneficial, maybe helping to calm inflammation by inhibiting the NF-kappa B pathway. So in one person it's a killer, and in another, it might be a protector. It's a total Jekyll and Hyde situation. And when it decides to go rogue, it's serious business. Bacteremia and sepsis are what we see most often, but it can cause really nasty infective endocarditis on both native and prosthetic valves, pneumonia, and even severe meningitis. So what's its secret weapon? Biofilms. It's an expert at forming these thick, protective biofilms, which is exactly why infections tied to medical devices are such a nightmare to clear. Okay, so you've got your ID. You know how dangerous this bug can be. Now for the million-dollar question. How do you treat it? This is tough because we are basically in a guideline-free zone. And this is the critical point, a huge challenge for us. There are no official endorsed clinical breakpoints for Rothia mucilaginosa from major groups like EUCAST. So when you get an MIC back from the lab, what do you do with it? You can't just look up the S, I, or R in a table. It forces you to rely on non-species-related PK/PD breakpoints, and frankly, a whole lot of expert review and clinical judgment. It's not straightforward at all. Now, let's talk about intrinsic resistance. This is key. Rothia mucilaginosa is naturally, characteristically resistant to fluoroquinolones like superfluoxacin. Think about what that means. You've got a neutropenic patient on fluoroquinolone prophylaxis. That antibiotic wipes out a ton of susceptible bacteria. But what does it do to Rothia? Nothing. It just sits there. We've literally rolled out the red carpet for it, creating the perfect scenario for a breakthrough infection. So what does treatment look like in practice? Well, if we look at the data for endocarditis, we see some pretty clear trends. For a native valve infection, you're looking at a long course, 4 to 6 weeks of something like penicillin G, ceftriaxone, or vancomycin. But for a prosthetic valve, the game changes. We're talking 6 weeks or more of vancomycin, often with gentamicin or rifampin added in. And very frequently, the only way to get a cure is to go in surgically and replace the infected hardware. It's that serious. And what about in kids? Well, in pediatric patients, you almost only ever see these infections in the most severely immunocompromised children. For them, vancomycin is really the cornerstone of therapy. It's the go-to choice. So treatment is complex, which brings us to prevention. How do we stop this from happening in the first place? Turns out, our best strategies are all about getting the fundamentals right. Yeah, there's no special anti-Rothia strategy. It all comes down to mastering these core infection control principles. Step 1, meticulous oral hygiene. This bug lives in the mouth, so you reduce the bacterial load right at the source, especially in your high-risk patients. Step 2, lock down your central lines. They are the #1 entry point, so strict adherence to SLAPSU prevention bundles is absolutely non-negotiable. And step 3, source control. If you have an infected device, a catheter, a valve, it almost always has to come out. You have to remove its fortress to win the battle. Now, I know a lot of you are going to want to dig into the primary literature on this, so you should know this whole explainer is based on a report that we generated using Gemini Deep Search. We put together a full notebook document with all the sources, and it's available for you to review, so please go check it out. So all of this leaves us with a really important question to take back to our own labs and hospitals. What's your institution's approach? When a Rothia mucilaginosa is isolated, how is it handled? Is it treated with the respect it deserves as a potential pathogen, or is there a chance it's still being overlooked as a simple contaminant? We'd really love to hear from you on this. What are you seeing in your practice? Go ahead and share your experiences in the comments below. And of course, if you found this useful, please subscribe for more microbiology explainers. Thanks for tuning in.